Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Dave F here at Boiled as an Owl, and I will be your host for the next several minutes. Today we're gonna go a little bit deeper into the insanity of addiction and all that good stuff. So probably gonna be staying within the step 2 protocol. But essentially, the other reality is that we have talked about step 2 and the principle of hope, but I then kind of went into step 3 into surrender. And I was talking to some folks about recovery and the idea of addiction and how it applies to either alcoholism or drug addiction, you name it. So what is our step 2? We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And step 2 basically is all about mental illness, right? However intelligent we may have been in all aspects of our life, when it comes to addiction, alcohol, drugs, you name it, the intelligence goes right out the window. Okay. So, even in my experience, and again, I've spoken that I never had to venture into detoxes. I never had to worry about doing anything that required hospitalization, none of that stuff. I drank. I love to drink. Alcohol was awesome. And I drank with the best of them. And I could hold a lot of liquor in my system. It was insane the amounts of drinking that I did. But I never hit the crossover point of full-blown alcoholism. I drank alcoholically, but I never needed to utilize a program outside of my own wishes. No one ever threw me into a detox center and said, here's this guy, have at it. I got to the point where I realized that I was insane. I kept doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And that different result never happened. And the sad part about it all was that I still had my faculties about me. I still had the ability to bring the daughter to her soccer games, be present during their games and be present during their lives. And then usually what I would do is I would enter into my 8 or 9 o'clock space. And that was my me time to get obliterated because I couldn't handle the unmanageability of my life. Wanted my second wife to love me, and I would do anything to get her to do that. I wanted my son and I to have a relationship. I would do anything to do that. But then what ended up happening is I would get so freaking bent out of shape and angry when I didn't get my way, because for whatever reason, once I started putting the alcohol in my system, the ability for my brain to actually do what was right and to actually critically think, to actually be present enough to make good decisions and all that stuff went out the window. And that's the mental insanity. All those things were my excuses to use to numb out, to change any kind of way I was feeling, because I didn't know how to do it without the substances. So, as it states in the Little Red Book, mental handicaps stand between us and recovery. Our lack of self-criticism defeats an honest evaluation of our alcoholism. Use of the word sanity offends our false pride. We have this sense of who we are. We're unstoppable. We're undefeatable. We're larger than life. And we have the ability to guide our own destiny, right? Until we don't. And I feel like a lot of times what ends up happening is we get into these places where we have these feelings of superiority that aren't based in reality. And we have a fragile sense of self. Ultimately, all that stuff is fueled by the fear of failure, criticism, or losing the approval of others. And that's all that false pride. We have an inflated ego. We become very manipulative. We devalue others, and we have a fragile sense of self-worth. And what does alcohol and drugs do? guess what? Those substances help us navigate this false pride because inherently we're all awesome people, but shit happens in our lives. And before you know it, we're not as cool as we think we are. Perfect example from my life. I was a all-state football player in high school. I went to a very small Catholic high school in Bristol, Connecticut, and I was a really good football player, but I was only good according to the people I was playing with, right? So in this small league we're in, I ended up being a pretty decent ball player, and I caught the eye of some colleges here and there, and I chose to go to a post-grad year. Actually, that choice was given to me by my dad because he didn't think I was good enough to go to college right off the bat. Well, when I got to Kent, my post-grad year, Kent School in Kent, Connecticut, I realized that I was mediocre at football. I thought I was one of the best people on the planet. But here's the best part, right? I had coaches and people in my life that were manipulating me to work harder for them so that they could get the accolades they needed for their coaching or what have you. So yeah, I was good, but I also was mediocre. I could have played like a D3, but I was never good enough for D1. And in my brain, that's where I wanted to go. So I'm in high school, I'm in my post-grad year, and I realized that I am a very small fish in a very large pond. A lot of the guys on the football team were leaps and bounds way better than anything I could have been. It really was a big blow to my ego, so much so that I basically just gave up. I was extremely overweight. My coach wanted me to gain a ton of weight so I could be a lineman. I hated playing the line. I was more of a tight end, and I loved playing nose guard. That was what I excelled in at football. But what happened? I got into a league where there were much better players. I wasn't as driven. I didn't even want to be at this school because I wanted to already have been in college. I lost touch with everybody, and I was struggling very deeply, mentally, physically, and emotionally. There were times when I was at that school, along with a lot of other students that were there. We were all sleeping at school. It wasn't a day school; it was an overnight high school. And I was in the pond with people's parents who, like, I went to school with the one of the presidents of Niger. I was hanging out with his kid. I was with this person and that person. These people had so much money. It was amazing. I did not fit in. I hated it. It was not where I was at, and it's not how I grew up. And because of that, I started hanging out with the kids that did the drugs and the drinking. And so we were able to sneak bottles of alcohol in. We were able to sneak drugs in. And that's what we did. We partied, and it wasn't even partying. It was actually sad because people were drinking because they couldn't handle the abandonment or the rejection from the parents. And so we just snuck alcohol in, and every Friday, Saturday night, we would drink. And that was that. My first drink, God, I was like 6 or 7 years old. I was at a wedding, and I was sneaking pony beers in the bathroom. I was like 6 or 7 years old, and we're at a wedding. Everyone's, hammered. The little kid, what does he do? He runs off, finds the alcohol in the bathroom, and the little pony beers. Like, it was crazy. My grandparents actually, on my mother's side, they were in this country, and I got to dip my bread in white wine when I was a kid. And you know what? I loved the taste of alcohol. I used to raid my parents' mini bar in the house. They didn't know that I was doing that. And the craziest part of being a 6, 7, 8-year-old and doing that was the fact that I had the wherewithal to actually add water to the liquor bottle so they wouldn't know. I wasn't drinking like an alcoholic, but I loved to have a drink every now and again. And it wasn't even a drink. It was like I would just take a mouthful from the bottle and put it back. And the reason being, everyone in my family got together every Sunday, large Italian family, tons of cousins, bunch of aunts and uncles, and everybody drank. So that's what I did. Now, fast forward 42 years later, and everything they say about alcoholism is true. You have a progression. You start progressing. I got to the point where 5 years ago, I'd go to the store to buy 3 bottles of wine so I could have 1 bottle of wine to share with my ex-wife. And on the way, I was drinking 2 bottles of wine just to get to the point where I could tolerate the pain that I was in that relationship. And then I'd buy a bunch of nips. I'd throw them in the back of the freezer, and I had some beers. And I was drinking very alcoholically at that point. Still didn't have the shakes. Still didn't have any of the bullshit that goes along with it. And like I said in a couple episodes before, I was at a point that if I didn't stop, I would have probably started getting the shakes. I would have started needing the drugs to calm you down a little bit. And I would have probably been sleeping with a bottle at the head of my bed and drinking that way. So I lucked out. I figured it out in time. The mental insanity that goes on is mind-blowing. And until you kind of separate yourself from it by really delving into the steps, you don't see it. And it's seldom that we see it, but everybody else does. And we're like so afraid to admit it because we're like, oh, what if everybody finds out now? And it's like, dude, I hate to break it to you, but pretty much every person that you know already knows that you're drinking the way you are. And it's pretty sad. We have to admit our illness, but I think in the very early stages, when we start admitting it, we rebel against the actual idea of it because we don't understand how mentally unstable we are. I have friends, when they tell me their stories, I'm blown away because they're literally, all they do is think about alcohol, how they're going to get their next drink or their next drug, or how they're going to manipulate time and people and places so that they could know exactly when and where that next drink was coming from. Because if they didn't get that next drink, they were shaking, they were jittery, and they would lose their shit. So that's kind of amazing to me. As I go to meetings and I hear people's stories, I can identify with the mental obsession piece. Again, I have a hard time identifying with the bodily craving because when the alcohol was done, it was done. I got to a point later on in my life where I could save a couple beers for the next day and not have to drink it all. I had the wherewithal to see my progression, and I knew it was getting out of control. Simple definition of insanity is a disorder of behavior that occurs when the body impulses no longer find in the brain a coordinating center for the conditioning of behavior. When this condition arises, the person's behavior is unpredictable and he or she becomes legally insane. When I was in my blackouts, brownouts, also when I was hanging out with others, I would watch my behavior. I'd see other people's behavior and I'd be like, holy cow, the personality change that alcohol or drugs give to a person is mind blowing. And a lot of people go, well, I'm California sober, so I don't drink or do drugs, but I smoke weed. Well, guess what? I see that the personality changes even with weed. And weed is as addictive as all hell. Now that it's legal, a lot of people that are actually using it that never would have before. It's got way more THC in the product, and you get way higher now than you ever did. Plus, there's people, they're smoking shatter. They're getting high on dabs. I mean, I remember I was at a party of a buddy's house. I was high on LSD, probably about 10 or 12 hits. That was my drug. And heroic amounts of LSD. And a buddy came through and had a dab rig. And I'm cracking up because at that point I had never seen one before. This is like around 2015. And I see this blowtorch coming out and all this shit. And I'm just like, wow, I guess everyone's going to be smoking crack or some kind of freebase. Come to realize, no, it's this shit that we call dabs. So I took one for the first time and last time. I was so high. I didn't even know what to do with myself. I was in the couch sweating and I was terrified because I thought I was going to die. My heart was going through my chest. And I was like, my God, I literally said this to everyone. I was like, how the hell are you people doing this 2 or 3 times a day? Like, I never want to be this high again. And I stopped smoking weed after all that because the THC levels for me were just too high and the weed was too potent and I just didn't even enjoy smoking anymore. Even 1 or 2 hits was just too much for me. I'm not saying that's everybody. I'm just saying that a lot of people are abusing weed now. And there's a lot of people in the program who smoke it and justify it by going, well, at least I'm not drinking and doing whatever. But like at the end of the day, you're still messing with your brain. That's my opinion. I'm not a doctor. I'm not saying anything. I just watch people. And when you need to hit your vape that's got, whatever oil in it or whatever, and you need to smoke, you hit that thing like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times a day. I'm sorry, you got issues, especially if you're doing that every single day, because you're not able to mentally be present enough to deal with life on life's terms, and you got to find a way to numb out. And so you're that's what you're doing. And there's a lot of people that use cannabis, and honestly, I'd rather see them using cannabis than getting wasted, shit-faced, and destroying their lives or booting up or whatever the hell else you want to do. There's people that love to abuse Molly. There's people that love to abuse psilocybin. I mean, there's a lot of people that do a lot of things. Now, that said, I think it's because at the end of the day, we are so insane and we keep doing the same kind of a thing over and over again. And if it's the lesser of 2 evils, that's okay, because you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, let's say. Your main thing is don't drink alcohol. So people are like, okay, well, I'm not drinking alcohol and I'm not doing any other hardcore drugs. But, caffeine's an addiction. Porn's an addiction. Shopping's an addiction. Sex is an addiction. I mean, everything's, when it's utilized to the point of creating unmanageability in your life, or whatever your vice is creating you to not be present in the moment because you can't wait to rub one out later. You can't wait to buy that thing because you're trying to fill this hole. You have a mental obsession and you have insanity. When you talk to people in the program, they all agree, hey, I'd rather have a nicotine addiction. Smoking cigarettes is fine. I'd rather have a coffee addiction and a sweet tooth, but at least I'm not drinking alcohol. And I applaud that because that's true. I love my coffee. I love my cookies. So I have 2 or 3 cookies at a meeting if they're out, and I have a cup or 2 of coffee. It's addictive the way I'm doing it, though, because I have to be super present to make sure the mental obsession stays at bay. So that's just how it is. And that's why they tell you can't take that first drink, because when you take the first drink, and this was me a couple times in some of my earlier days before I, walked through the rooms, but like I would always tell myself, this time I'm going to control it and I'll be fine. I never got crazy. Like if I was at the bar, I was like, I'm just going to have one. And then before the night's over, you had 3 or 4. You know what I mean? And that's the insanity. I'm just going to have one. And then you're drinking, and then you're having those convivial moments, and everything's going great. And next thing you know, you're having a couple, and then you're having the camaraderie with the people in the bar and blah, blah, blah. So there's this whole romantic way of looking and romanticizing the drinking. When you're in that alcoholic insanity, the next thing you know is that your continued use of the alcohol ends up becoming a physical and mental addiction, because it becomes a daily responsibility for you to go out and get that drink. When you've tipped over the point of no return, it's the morning after. I got a drink that I have to get where I got to go, but I got to make sure that on my way, I can pick up some drinks, I pick up some nips, whatever. And that's where we stumble, because we don't have the wherewithal to take a very deep moral inventory or be self-critical We lack that power, and then we lash out and get angry with the people around us that are calling us on our bullshit, because how dare they? I deserve to drink. I worked my ass off. This one died. I had a good day. I'm going to have a drink. Any excuse imaginable. That's what we're doing, and that's how we roll. And we double down on bad ideas when we start delving into the second step, which again, you're asking to be restored to sanity. And then hopefully by the time you get into the third step, like we discussed last time, you're going to be able to surrender to this power greater than yourself. We have a tough time understanding that we can't undo any of the things we did in the past. And so we go into this desperation as we enter the program. And those first 3 to 6 months, man, they really rub you so hard. And it's almost like they knock the hell out of you, because you get some clarity. Your brain is returning to some semblance of sanity. Your behavior's changing, and now you don't have any substances in your body, and you're actually sitting and stewing in your shit, and you're like, holy cow. And the regret train comes into the station, hurtling 120 miles an hour sometimes. And you see it time and time again. And, you look around the room and you're praying to God that the fellowship, the 12 steps, and the service are really going to help. And the more you do it, make the coffee for others, chair some meetings when you have some time, door greeting, all that stuff basically is utilized to help return you to sanity, because you're getting out of yourself, you're thinking about others, and you're actually being of service. And yeah, it might only be 5 hours a week, 6 hours a week. We have a commitment to make coffee, whatever. Maybe even it's only an hour a week. Doesn't matter. When you show up and you suit up and you do all the things you need to do, you start getting out of yourself, you stop aligning with self-pity, and you start really, truly beginning to love yourself, because you become grateful that there are people that no matter how fucked up you are or how much you fucked up in the past, there are people who will still love you no matter what, and they will give you the grace and the empathy you need in those meetings. Because, and not everyone, because there are some people that are hurt and are hurting even more than you are. But if you find the people who are working their program and they're not just giving you lip service, but they're actually walking in the direction of what they're telling you they're doing, you are in such a great place to make such drastic changes in your thought process. Because what'll happen is you'll start relying on the group, you'll start relying on sponsorship, and then inevitably you'll start relying on your higher power. And your higher power will restore you to sanity if you do the work. And the work is simple. Go to meetings, work with a sponsor, and get your ass moving on those 12 steps as soon as possible. Because a lot of people are in this gray area of life or death. And if you can't get out of yourself in those first couple of years of sobriety, eventually you're just going to go back out. And it's sad to say, but it's the truth. I see it time and time again. Remember, in spite of all the knowledge that we basically have, we are still willfully continuing our walk into self-centeredness. We ignore that bigger picture of mental illness, and then our alcoholic thinking will literally create the divide necessary to displace humility. And when you don't have any humility, you're going to basically return to physical drunkenness at some point, because you're going to lack a growth in your spiritual program. And that's why it's so important to have that mental piece taken care of with your higher power, and just mirroring those in the program that are actually living joyous, free, and happy lives, because they're not full of shit. They might seem to be sometimes, but I don't think they are. You can literally tell who's truly happy, joyous, and free. It goes beyond just seeing them in the 1 hour. Like, you'll see them out in the real world and you'll see it. It's really beautiful, And, just remember, if you think you're controlling your drinking and you're succumbing to blackouts or the inability to look at yourself and do a deep moral inventory, if you have emotional instability, just meaning that if anything goes wrong, you don't have the strength and the wherewithal to just be in it and move through it. And instead of being triggered, you can actually maneuver the emotional state without too much, anger, frustration, and fear. But you get triggered and you're just constantly going backward into the irritability and being in discontent, then you're still not really working your step 2 that well. And honestly, those first 3 steps are so crucial to this program because it's all about admitting your powerlessness and then ultimately surrendering the fact that you tried this shit on your own and you can't do it. You need a higher power. And it's scientifically shown that those who have a higher power are significantly more successful in recovery than those that don't. So I wanted to do an episode just on that because, it's like when you do your 4th and 5th step and then you're like, and now you just go home and you pull your book off the shelf and you sit in contemplation and then you do your 6th and 7th step prayer and that's it. And you're given like one whole little couple sentences in the big book. And then thank God for the 12 and 12, because after that, we get to experience a much broader sense of what steps 6 and 7 are actually all about. So God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you for listening. It was wonderful to kind of navigate that. I hope I wasn't all over the place, but I just wanted to do an episode just for that particular aspect of things. So thanks for listening. I wish you the best of the best, and I hope that you have things to be grateful for because that'll really help get you further in this process. And if nobody told you that they love you, I'm going to tell you I love you now. And I'm proud of you for moving forward in this because it ain't easy. But you know what? When you live life on life's terms and you actually embrace the change necessary to move into a better, more holistic, more healthy direction, it's so worth it. And I hope you have a good evening. Take care.